I'm Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Angela.
We are the Ink Mages. Join us as we discuss all things fantasy, world building, storycraft, myths and legends, and of course, our own imaginative stories. Hello and welcome to the Ink Mages podcast. We took a break during January and we are back, and with Valentine's Day around the corner, we thought it would be fun to do a more romantic themed episode. So to start things off, we're going to share our favorite romanticy or romantic story that we have loved throughout the years. So Angela, tell us your favorite story.
Well, definitely. I love the classics. So when you're talking about like Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, actually, I think my favorite, Jane Austen. Yeah, there it is. I haven't read this yet. Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. So anybody leaving the comments who has read this book, let me know if it's worth it. I kind of love zombies. I think they're fun. So this could be a really fun read. I'm kind of looking forward to diving into it. But my favorite is probably Persuasion, which is a Jane Austen. So this isn't a fantasy. I don't usually diverge from fantasy sci-fi too much. That's kind of my favorite thing to read. But these particular love stories that Jane Austen writes, I love them so much because they're so in-depth. And I love just the character development and, like Pride and Prejudice, you got the enemies turned lovers kind of going on. And even in Persuasion, which is what I love, it's the two that just misunderstand and they're afraid to really reach out and see if the other one still loves them. And it's kind of like these puzzles that come together that you're just like rooting for through the entire story. And I love that. And I always love when the characters are well written as well. So they stick with you and it makes you cheer for them even more when it comes to a love story. It's not just these two people who fall in love, but these deep, rich characters that you're championing because you love them so much and you're invested, which is why I am not a fan generally. There are some exceptions to the rules of any love stories that end in complete tragedy. I mean, of course, Romeo and Juliet is the exception. I think with Shakespeare, I do love Shakespeare. I'm a big fan.
Me too.
But I know I'm getting into a tragedy with Shakespeare most of the time. So, but
then you're rooting that they're not going to end up dead.
You're right. This time, even though I know that the story hasn't changed, maybe this time it'll be different. Maybe this time there'll be a different ending. But generally, if I'm watching a movie or I'm reading a story and it ends in tragedy, I'm like, meh, that's, the whole Divergent series. I don't want to give any spoilers, but I did like that particular sci-fi fantasy story. I even liked how it ended because it was very heroic. Sorry if there's any spoilers out there. I'm not telling you exactly what happens, but I really liked how that story was developed. It was a fun read for me. But really, when it comes down to what I love, like even I was a sucker for Phantom of the Opera for the longest time. Like it's so romantic and yet so dysfunctional when you really think about it.
No, I literally once I realized that the Phantom was a narcissist, I haven't watched it since.
Because you're right, he's this really dysfunctional person.
He is. So I have to if I'm gonna watch it again, it's like, okay, Raoul and Christine. That's the romance. That's the love that I have to be of course, rooting for.
Yes.
So.
And I always love it when there's someone fighting for love, which is what Raoul does. He's fighting for Christine.
He's the hero.
He's the hero. And I'm sorry, I love the classic heroes. I love the classic good guy. But again, you've got the Han Solo and Princess Leia, where you've got the more anti-hero type guy, bad boy.
Enemies to lovers. Yes.
Yes. And, just talking about that, we were talking before we started recording, how, even when you're not watching something that's considered like a romantic story or it's not necessarily a love story itself, even action and adventure, even Indiana Jones, like a lot of these stories, they're the best when they have a love story in the mix, because you've got now these two characters where you're not just hoping they get to the end, but you're actually hoping that they end up together too. And every heart kind of desires that they're going to end up together somehow, something's going to happen. And so I super love that. How about you, Stephanie?
Well, we touched on, I mean, you brought up your favorites, which are also my favorites. But in honor of like what we're talking about today, I wore my Howl's Moving Castle shirt because
Oh, yes.
I absolutely love the love story in Howl's Moving Castle between Hal and Sophie.
Yeah.
So I love the development that happens. Sophie is this like insecure girl, but she's also content with where she is. Like, I know I'm plain, I know I'm boring, I am content to just work in my little hat shop. But when she meets Hal, there's like these heart flutters of, oh my gosh, he's so, mysterious, handsome. There was something about him, but he'll never look my way. Little does she know that he's been searching for her for his whole life. So
Wow.
it's beautiful. It's my favorite. And I love that the little romantic ways that Hal shows his affection for her, but she's still she doesn't see herself as beautiful. So when he does pay her compliments, she's like, kind of just turns away and's like, no, you're not right. So if you haven't watched it, you should. It's adorable.
I actually
And
just recently watched it because you recommended it. I watched it
yep.
with my kids, and I did love how I actually kind of sometimes get captured by these love stories that are kind of the awkward love story, where
Mm-hmm.
like you kind of feel like it's like it is kind of mismatched or awkward, or it doesn't seem like it should connect, but yet you want it to so badly. And that story really hits some of those points that made it really stick with you when you were done watching it.
Mm-hmm.
You're like rethinking about all of the situations and how it played out. And
Yep.
really love that movie.
It's super whimsical. It fits that fantasy, love, and it's beautifully just rendered. So definitely encourage you to check that one out. So what I want to do for this episode also is share some quick and easy tips to add romantic chemistry to your story. So, whether you're writing a romantasy or you're just writing a fantasy book and you want to include some romance as a subplot, these are I have 8 tips that you can just add in a little bit of romantic flair that will just help readers fall in love with your characters. So, chemistry, we're all about chemistry, it is that magical ingredient that makes us spellbound. It's the spark that makes these characters shippable, making readers want more and more. As Angela was saying, like with Houseman Castle, she was thinking about it like afterwards
Mhm.
because the love story stood out. And so if you want your character's love story to stand out, these are some ways to do it. And you don't have to just start from scratch. These are easy ways to weave it in as you progress through your story. So the first one is forced proximity. I love this trope. I think a lot of people love it too, and there are lots of good reasons for it. So get your characters alone together as much as possible. Get them trapped alone
Mhm.
together. Put them in a situation where they need to rely on each other. This will cause lots of tension and create opportunities to trust one another and possibly share their secrets. So, just briefly, I do this in The Conjurer's Curse. As the adventure is starting off, Rowan meets Tahira, and they kind of have to work together, trust each other, rely on each other as they battle different creatures, monsters. And during that time, it kind of deepens the relationship. It's still like a friendship, but it's like, there's some chemistry happening here. So you do that by they're alone and have to work together. And so during that time, they may share secrets, which leads to the second tip: sharing secrets between your characters. Let them be
Mhm.
vulnerable. It's a major building block for the relationship. I love it when your characters can share something that nobody else knows. It makes the characters instantly closer and it builds that trust because trust is the like most essential component for a couple. Like without that trust, it's things are probably going to fall apart.
Mhm.
So, and maybe that's a struggle that maybe your enemies to lovers will have to work on is finding that trust. Yeah. So, tip number 3 is nicknames. And this is a fun one. Give your characters special names that only the love interest calls the character. It can be cute and fun, or if you have an enemies to lovers, then maybe they have like a scathing and critical insult name that they call each other. I think in the race of Arjun, I have Mara always is calling Akron a snake
Mhm.
or a reptile, so that's kind of a funny little insult. And the Conjurer's Curse, Tahira is calling Rowan Row, so that's just a shortened form of the name. And my Heartsmith story, my main character Aaron calls Sasha Miss Open Book. So you can get real creative and tailor it to your characters and how they see the other person. Make sure it like fits in with the world. Don't have something that's super modern if
Right.
you're writing something that is medieval fantasy. Okay. All right. Tip number 4 is inside jokes and banter. You get bonus points if your characters reference something only they know and nobody else gets. So there's that inside joke. It's something only they share, and it adds layers of closeness. And I'm all for banter. So if your couple can sweetly tease each other with banter, and it just adds so much richness, depth. It makes readers absolutely love them because it shows that these two can maybe tease each other. They can kind of poke fun without it being insulting. But again, with enemies to lovers, you can kind of flavor that up and spice it up with the insults. And they have to come to a place of like now mutual understanding. Okay, tip number 5 is a heightened perception of each other's emotion. I really love this one because it shows the intimacy that your couple is building upon when nobody else notices that the character is struggling with something except
Mhm.
for the love interest. They sense when something is bothering them. It shows how close these characters are without coming out and telling the readers. If you have a character that broods a lot, then the the love interest might be like, oh no, he's thinking too much. His brow is scrunched. So it's knowing like what kind of leads to them falling into a quandary or, so I think those are just wonderful ways to just show how close a couple is. Number 6, protectiveness. And this isn't always from like wanting to protect the love interest from a dangerous situation. Sometimes it can be from emotional pain. There's
Mhm.
always that like misunderstanding, or I didn't tell you something because I wanted to protect you. I didn't want to hurt your feelings. So things like that can work. This also works great with enemies to lovers. And it can be really fun because here they are warring against their dislike for this person. Maybe they just constantly, one of the couples in the relationship just always is vexing them, but for some reason that they can't explain, they are compelled to protect them. And this pulls back those stubborn layers and makes us root for their relationship. Now, I've been doing this with the third book in the Iron Kingdom series with Akron, my anti-hero, and the love
So
interest,
good.
Mara. Oh my gosh, it's just from the beginning. It's like the forced proximity happens. They are forced to have to work together to fight off some enemies. And it's like Akron has this moment. I shared it in my post yesterday. Where like the hardness and callousness of his heart starts to like melt. And he has this realization of, oh my gosh, I'm falling hard for her. Like, I don't know what I'm feeling, but I want to have this a real moment with her. And later it's like, I will hurt anyone who dares to harm her. So it's like he's warring against the fact that, like, no, we don't get along. She vexes me like crazy, but for some reason I can't explain. I want to protect her. Oh, it's so gold. It's gold. So, yes, the protectiveness is awesome. Tip number 7, constant reminders of each other. So, they're always on each other's mind when they're not together. Everything reminds them of each other. They reminisce of special times spent together. They long for the next time they see each other. Mm. I swoon. I swoon for stuff like that.
Swooning is good. You want your readers to swoon.
Yes. And number 8, endearment. Adding in what endears the couple to one another. I feel like this is so important for me as a reader and often, and even as an editor when I'm editing people's books. I want to know why these characters are drawn to each other. It can't just be that, like, oh, he's handsome or oh, she's pretty. It's like, no, no, no. There's got to be something deeper that connects them. And it can be silly stuff and it could be quirks. It can be the way they laugh, smile. They do something that's unique to the character. And in The Heartsmith, my book that's coming out in October, I do this with like Aaron as he interacts with Sasha. When she smiles, her dimples form. He finds that adorable. He thinks her freckles are adorable. The fact that she has ink stains on her fingers is just a very interesting thing to him. So, like, it's little quirks that endear the other character to each other. And then the last thing with that is affirm each other's strengths and they help them with their weaknesses. I just love that one. So those are my 8 tips. They're quick and easy. And something also to think about with these tips is these are some things that don't have anything to do with physical touch per se. This is just ways to show how deep your character's love can grow without like having to touch. So yeah.
Which should be the whole substance of the story, because that's really what's going to bring somebody in and get them really attached to the characters in the first place, because this is all really going to develop the characters and make them stronger, and make people actually cheer for them to be together. And I know that there's those 2 ways of telling a romantic story. I mean, there's several ways, but there's the quick falling in love at the insta love. There's the and then there's the long haul, where it's
slow burn.
The slow burn. See, she always has the keywords. Like, I'm like, that one. She's like, yeah, the slow burn. I'm like, yeah,
insta love, slow burn. I'm more I like slow burns. I'm usually kind of cringe at insta love unless it's like the insta love becomes a slow burn.
Yes, right. Which
like
you can do.
It's an instant connection, but like, oh, we have to kind of walk this out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've with my books, I've done a little bit of both. So like my first series, the Once and Future Chronicles trilogy, it's kind of an insta love. But it takes a little while to develop, and it's fun hearing these tips because I can even see, like, I've got the forced proximity with Merlin and Eleanor at the very beginning of the story, and the shared secret of the fact that there's this mysterious magic that kind of binds them together. They're both seeing the same things kind of in the spirit realm. They're connected in this way, and they're both, well, particularly Merlin, he's very protective because he's been alone in the world, the only person like him, and he has for the first time met somebody that is living in his world, kind of experiences the world the way he does. And so this kind of opens the door for that to happen. Now, in my first series, the insta love was a little bit of a necessity for the storytelling itself. Since my first book, I wouldn't say is necessarily a romance, it's more of an adventure with a love story attached to it. Now I'm writing a new book and it's a slow burn, and I've got a new, and I wouldn't say this is necessarily, it's definitely going to be a love story, a redemptive love story from the get-go, but it's going to be a little bit of the tense enemy type situation where these 2 characters are not going to get along. And it's funny because when Stephanie was going through the tips, I was kind of like thinking in my mind what I had written and some of the things that I've already done in my stories. And it's funny because my new story, The Lost Son of Orcades, you've got this character that is been crippled from birth. And he walks from a limp and he meets this fiery, redheaded, like angry girl who her first thing is to nickname him kind of a root, she's like, hey, Gib, and so she's always calling him this to like purposely like tear him down. But it becomes her like thing that she calls him. And that starts to soften and change after a while. Obviously, we don't want her calling him that forever if we're going to be cheering for her.
Right.
I do want people to be cheering for her.
They
But
need to grow.
but it's her way of like putting up a wall, because he is from the
Mm.
get-go, they meet each other and he's pushing down her walls, and she can feel herself softening and wanting to trust him, but she's refusing to let that happen. And so there's all these things that she puts up in the way to force that from happening. And I think that's a fun way when you're writing a story to create tension. You know what's going on in your character's head. Her walls are being pushed on. She's thinking about him. She's seeing him. She enjoys spending time with him, but she's not ready. So she's forcing these
Mm-hmm.
walls and she's pushing him away. And it causes that tension because you want to like the characters that are your heroes in the story. You want to like the characters that you're bringing together, kind of like what Stephanie does with Akron and Mara. You know, they don't always make the best choices, but you like them and you're cheering for them. And I really want that essence of knowing who my characters are and her why for being so stubborn and pigheaded. She's not just mean. Like, in fact, she's
Mm-hmm.
not really mean. She's just really hurting. And so I want to put in a lot of elements that make you want to cheer for her and cheer for her to want, because you know that my other character is bringing out the best in her, and you want to see that gold come
Yeah.
out. You want to see it
Mm-hmm.
shine and see her become the person that you're cheering for. So be careful when you're writing a character to not make them so mean and hateful that the reader's like, I don't care if they ever get together. She's so dysfunctional.
Right.
I don't want my character falling in
Oh,
love with her,
yes.
because it wouldn't be good for him. You want her to have a lot
Yes.
of redemptive qualities in the mix of her struggle, so that you're like, no, I know she's actually not like this. This is just what she's struggling through right now.
And a
So
good, oh, yeah, if I can
yeah, go ahead.
interject, a good way to
Yeah.
do that is to hint at vulnerabilities that she
Yes.
has. Because I feel like I did that with Mara too. Like, she is just a
Yes.
complete jerk in the Race of Argent, but it's like she hints at these little vulnerabilities, and that is the door that opens the window or opens the door for us to eventually like her. And when Akron softens, we as the reader soften. So yeah,
Yes.
keep that in mind.
Yeah. I cannot tell you any spoilers about her book 3 that she's working on right now. It's so awesome, but I'm telling you,
Thank you.
yeah, favorite. I love it so much. It's I definitely am enjoying reading it. Every time we get to the Akron and Mara parts, I'm like, yes. I'm excited
And
to read it.
that's what you want. That's what you want with your romantic couple, is that the reader gets excited and it's like, oh yay, we're back to so and so.
Yes.
It's that giddy feeling. Oh, that
Yes.
just keeps pulling us in, drawing us in. We want more. We want like fan art of the couples. We obsess over it. Oh.
Yes. I think one of the other favorite books that I've read, and it was an interesting one because I mean, I do enjoy zombies. I don't like watching, it's funny because I don't like watching a lot of zombie movies anymore. I used to when I was younger. I can't do that now, but there's something about that whole kind of genre that's kind of appealing to me and fun. And it made me pick up the book. I think I've mentioned on the podcast
Yes.
before,
Yes.
Warm Bodies.
There we go. Mhm.
And that one, I mean, it's a fun movie, but the book is even better. And I love this idea of this zombie that's literally being pulled back to life. I mean, that's something that I've not seen done with that whole kind of like sci-fi fantasy genre when it comes to zombies, is that, you know, when somebody's a zombie, they're dead, they're a corpse. They're not going to come back to life. There's nothing that can bring them back to life. And this whole spin on this idea that actually there is something in them that can come back to life, and it's because of love. And kind of this mysterious connection that starts to pull not only one zombie, but it starts a chain reaction. And
Ooh.
and I loved how that story, like the arc of the whole story was that love is a powerful thing. And it wasn't, I enjoy reading. If I'm going to read a love story, I want a reason. I do want a good arc. I want to have
Mhm.
a good storyline that goes along with it. I'm not the type to want to read a romantic story just to get like the swoony romance. I want a good story that has a good arc and a good reason, because love's a powerful thing. And it goes beyond just sometimes the swoony moments if you can write it well. And
Mhm.
it can actually really teach you something about yourself, about your characters, and of the overall theme of the story and where it's going. And Warm Bodies does that really well. It was kind of, and it is very, I think a lot of things with with zombies can be very metaphorical. And you can see that in that book where it's like, society's gone to sleep. They're dead to love. They're just living their everyday lives as zombies. And here comes the spark of life that starts pulling people out of their everyday mundane. And so I appreciated that. I thought it was really well done.
Oh man, I want to just like swing back to Han and Leia. If
Yeah,
as
let's
we
go.
get back to force proximity, okay, starting back with that first tip. Empire Strikes Back is like one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yep, me
Okay,
too.
after Fellowship of the Ring. But like in Empire Strikes Back, Han and Leia are forced to work, like have to work together. And when it starts off, there is a chemistry that's undeniable, but they are so mouthy with each other, like what? I thought I would leave without giving you a goodbye kiss. And her banter is, I would just assume kiss a Wookiee. He's like, I can arrange that. There is sparks. I mean, there is so much sparks in that moment. And you're just like, oh, if they could just kind of put down their pride, put down like their stubbornness and just kind of let those vulnerabilities in. Oh, we're gonna swoon. And that it eventually happens, but like the force proximity is so crucial for that happening. Luke is not around. It's just them in a ship, the Millennium Falcon, running from the enemy, and like time after time after time they're having to rely on each other. She has to trust his instincts which is like, oh my god, I can't believe my life is in this scoundrel's hands. Oh, it's so good. Enemies to lovers. And I've been watching that movie since the 90s, early 90s, so that was kind of my blueprint for how to write a compelling, tension-filled love dynamic. And I feel like I owe that for Akron and Mara's dynamic. I totally owe it to Han and Leia's chemistry in that movie.
Well, I mean, the most classic line, and it's so funny. You see it like on memes all across the board.
Mugs, pillows.
Mugs, pillows, but he's going down. He's about to be frozen in carbonite. And she goes, I love you. And he goes, I know. You're like, yes. And it's so on theme with their snarky banter that you start to love. At first you're like, oh, come on, guys. But as it goes and it develops, you're like, this is so great. I love how they relate together and how they, have that spark. And then finally that vulnerability that comes out in that moment. And then, man, now you can't wait for Return of the Jedi, because Han and Leia have been separated. And great way to create tension, especially if you're doing a slow burn. Mm-hmm. But you want to bring in a little bit of connection, that they're coming together, is to somehow separate them. So that it, now they're reaching for each other across the way, trying to search for each other, whatever it is.
Across the stars,
like Last of the Mohicans, I will find you, just
that's
that.
Right. No matter where you go, I will find you.
Exactly. And it makes your reader go, I hope you do, because if you don't, I'm going to hate this movie.
Yes.
Or I hate this book. But you want them to reach. I remember the first time I actually watched Pride and Prejudice before I read the bok. So this would have been
Which one?
The original BBC one. That's like 6 episodes, I think it is. Yep, Colin Firth. Yes. And I think so this was like in like 2000, and a friend of mine's like, you've never seen Pride and Prejudice? I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I was like, I didn't even know Jane Austen at that point. And she's like, you got to see this movie. And we only rented 3 of them. So this is back when you could go to Blockbuster and rent, right? So we went to Blockbuster, we rented 3 of them, 3 of the 6 episodes. And the 3rd episode ends with, Elizabeth Bennet had just been to Darcy's Manor House, and they had kind of this like connection, and they have just been fighting this whole time. Mm-hmm. And you're like just upset at their stubbornness. And right as the carriage is pulling away, she's pulling away from the manor house, she turns around and looks at him. And I went, like, I looked at my friend and I was like, we are going back to Blockbuster right now. I think it was like 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, we've got to get the rest of them, because I'm like, she looked at him. She got it. She clicked. She
She
sees
looked at him.
she sees who he is. Like, he's not just this stubborn, prideful guy. There's a lot more
Yeah.
to Darcy than that.
Mm.
And I loved that. Okay, so but now they're being separated, at that
It
moment
builds
when they
it
get
builds
it.
the anticipation for next
Oh,
time, right? Isn't that
oh
our
gosh, it was my
on our
favorite.
tip?
And yeah, yes, exactly. And so we went back to the movie store that night and we got the rest of them. I binge watched that entire series that night. And then I watched it again. And then I started reading the books and picking up the rest of them. And that's where I stumbled upon Persuasion. And I still
Ah,
think they haven't made a good movie for Persuasion yet.
no.
They
No, they
keep
have not.
butchering that one. And there was a BBC one that was good. But I just feel like they could do that
Yes,
one.
I
I'm
think
sorry
so.
if anybody loved the new Netflix Persuasion that came out, but that was awful. Like,
Yeah,
they
no, so
butchered that to pieces. And so I'm waiting for a good Persuasion to come out. Like the Emmas, they have several good Emmas. I mean, I feel like I
they
could pick
do.
any of the Emmas, and I'm like, oh, that's so fantastic. But anyway, I digress.
For me, my first exposure for Pride and Prejudice was the Keira Knightley, Matthew McFadyen
Mm,
version, which I think came out in 2005. So I was in high school,
yeah.
and I think I had already read Pride and Prejudice by that time, like in high school. Um, but talking about that moment that like stood out for me. Again, there's a carriage. It probably is the same scene, but the way that it was captured in the Keira Knightley version was Darcy helps her onto the carriage by holding her hand, okay? And then all of a sudden, the camera pans to him walking away and it focuses just on his hand, and his hand goes like this. And I'm like, oh my God, he's got the feels. He
The
has been
sparks
injected.
flew.
He's in totally in love. He's denying his like better instincts. So, I love that moment. And again, it comes back to our tips of these things don't have to be super spicy and like all
Mhm.
about physical touch. It was literally he helped her into the carriage, just
Yeah.
that subtle touch. And he's like, ah,
Yeah.
walking away like, oh my God, what just happened to me? Like, he doesn't have to say anything. I know what is racing through his mind because of the hand
Yes.
gesture.
And keeping in mind those little sparky moments, like it's just those little things in your storytelling that can go a mile in developing your character's connection and their relationship. Because I remember that scene too, and it really like communicates so much
Mm-hmm.
of the change and the
Yes.
transition of the characters and what's happening to them. And it's funny. I'm gonna tell a quick little story, but when I met my husband, so I had been living in Ireland and I had just come home, and some friends of ours, we didn't know we were being set up, so they tricked us. They pretended it was just a bunch of people getting together as friends, and anyways, we met, and literally at the end of the night, he touched my hand to say goodnight. And it was there was a moment of sparks where I went, whoa, that's never happened before. And he said that night he danced to his car, got on the phone and told his mom, I just met the woman I'm gonna marry. And so there was like that spark or that moment where it was like we connected and it was like immediate, we knew.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I love that that can be true in real life as well as in our storytelling.
Oh, now that you've shared that, I feel like I want to just
Yes.
quickly share.
Come on, it's Valentine's Day. Let's
It
do it.
is. It's Valentine's Day. Oh my gosh. So I met my husband at a grocery store at the checkout line, and there was a little bit of banter back and forth. I didn't know him, but like I had spotted him on an aisle. I'm like, oh, that guy's handsome. He's got a dove tattoo on his shoulder. Like,
Hmm.
I want. Oh, that's interesting. And then we get in line together, and there's this little back and forth banter. And we're kind of laughing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to know more about this person. So I am stuffing my stuff in the grocery bag as slow as possible. I am giving every signal to this guy that like, hi, I want to talk to you. So then I like walk out of the grocery store. He follows me and he's like, hey, can I talk to you? And I'm like, actually, I really wanted to talk to you. And we start off real quick, just a little bit of banter. And he's like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I write epic fantasy. He's like, wait, so do you like Lord of the Rings? I'm like, I love Lord of the Rings. Like
what a great connection point right there.
I am a history buff. And he's like, and he tells me his name, like Alan. And I'm like, oh, like Alan a Dale, like one of Robin Hood's merry men. And
That's
he's
awesome.
thinking, like, who is this? But it was
Isn't
like,
it?
okay, he's like, I need your number right now.
Oh
It's
my
like,
gosh.
it was so nerdy. So,
I love that.
think of those little, like the cute meets with your characters. They can be silly, they can be goofy. Mine totally was. It was like a Lord of the Rings was mentioned and it was over. And little did I know that like a week prior, my husband had been talking to his brother and he said, you know what? I'm going to just cut to the chase. It's like, if I see a gal that I want to like go on a date with, I'm going to just ask her right flat out, do you love Lord of the Rings? If she says yes, we're going on a date.
There you go.
And that's it. History. It's written.
Oh, I love that. I love hearing that story. That makes me so happy. Oh, and I love that it was nerdy and
A
just
little nerdy.
quintessentially perfect, really, when it comes down to it. We would love at the Ink Mages if you want to leave in the comments your favorite Kismet moment in a movie or your favorite book, or even it's Valentine's Day or Valentine's Day is coming, your favorite your moment when you met your person. We'd love to hear about it here at the Ink Mages. And thanks for tuning in. We had a little break in January. Now we're back. We've got some interviews coming up. We've got some great episodes. We're going to be talking about cover design and how to put together the interior of your book. We've got a lot of really fun episodes coming up. So please stay tuned and let us know what you think. Ask us your favorite questions. We cannot wait to interact with you. More episodes to come. So leave us a like, leave us a comment, share our episodes, and we'll see you next time.